Hello everyone and welcome back to Milo Farms. Well, we've got our first fall snowmobile video here, and today we are going to be doing a pre-season maintenance on this 2007 Yamaha Phazer Mountain Light. We're going to change the engine oil, we're going to change the chain case oil, and we're going to kind of look the sled over, lubricate the grease fittings on the suspension down there, and just kind of do a good once over on it, getting it ready to go. So just getting started, you always want to take a look at the general maintenance chart that you have in your owner's manual. This particular book here is the actual shop manual, the dealer shop manual. But in the owner's manual is basically the same chart, and it just kind of covers, you know, which things you should do on a pre-operation check, or monthly, or so many miles, or seasonally, and whatnot. So this check we're doing today isn't going to cover everything, but it's going to cover the high points that I think are the most important things. And a lot of the stuff you just kind of stumble across in the process, things on there, and a lot of things I know have already been done. But these are just going to be the high points, and also going to cover how to change the oil, which is a difficult one on these Phazers for some people, and also how to change the chain case fluid, which is relatively easy. So for me, I always like to start with getting the sled up in the air just a little easier to work on. So if I put these carbide savers under here, that gets us about 6 inches off the ground in the front. And then in the back here, I have this kind of setup where I ran this come along here up to the lower cord of that truss and down there. It's definitely not a good idea to be lifting things on the lower cords of the trusses, but you can get away with it, and as long as we're not lifting things that are terribly heavy, you can get away with it periodically. And so I'm not too worried about it in this application, but not something I'd recommend. So we'll go ahead and use this come along here. We'll lift it up about 6-8 inches off the ground in the back as well. So you can see there we're kind of up off the ground. That does a couple things. It makes it just a little bit easier to work on. You can get underneath, you can get your drip pan underneath a little bit better. It also allows us to spin the track by hand and check all the rollers under there, and also to see kind of where the track tension is at, and to get in there and do the grease fittings without it being quite as close to the floor. So now that we've got it positioned where we're going to work on it, we're going to go ahead and take these side panels off. This is one of the things that's super easy on these Phazers, is these gray panels here. We're looking at the left side right now. You've got a keeper right there. You've got another keeper down under here, one here at the top, and I think that's it on this side. Pop those off, and the entire side cover comes off. Then down at the bottom, you've got a screw here, and then right inside of here is an Allen headed screw as well. Then that'll get the bottom cover off, and they're basically about the same on both sides, pretty self-explanatory to get off. So we're going to go ahead and get those both off, and then we'll see what we're working with. So one thing I did forget to mention here for this project, we're basically going to need a small set of sockets, metric, a set of combination wrenches here, metric, and a set of metric Allen wrenches. You can also substitute the tools that come in the toolkit. You've got the 10mm right here to take the lower side covers off, those gray ones. There's also the Allen wrench that comes with the toolkit, so you can do the same thing with the stuff in the toolkit as well, but it's just easier to do it with normal wrenches. So we've got both sides of the machine uncovered here. So over on this side you can see the oil tank and radiator, and then up under right here is where the antifreeze, where you check the level on that. Over here on the other side you can see the clutch area. So we're going to go ahead and take this cover off the top of the clutches. So you pull this pin right here all the way back, lift this panel up, and the whole thing just comes off. We'll set that to the side as well. So as you can see right here, mine does not have a drive belt on it. That makes it a little easier to move in the shop. It makes it easier to inspect the clutches. And you can go ahead and start the engine without that drive belt on there. It says in the books and stuff that you shouldn't do that, but as long as you don't rev the engine up real high or get carried away with it, and just be mindful of it not being there, you can run it without the drive belt on it. And it does make it much easier for things like just warming it up a little bit to change the oil, or if you're trying to make an adjustment or tune something, just to have it running. Makes it a little bit easier. It doesn't wear the belt out, and so on. So let's go ahead with our first part of the inspection. I always like to kind of just look over the clutches, make sure there's nothing cracked, make sure there's nothing broken, Make sure there's not big streaks or anything in them from anything rubbing or being broken. You can kind of check these rollers that are on here. Make sure there's not anything loose inside of here. These bolts being loose right here is normal. That's just kind of how they are. Everything looks all right on this clutch. That's the primary clutch. Then the secondary clutch here, or the driven clutch, kind of the same thing. We've got this thing up in the air, so we can go ahead and just crank this over. Nothing's really dragging or making weird noises underneath. And a little bit of play side to side on this clutch is also normal. Don't see anything broken down in there or cracks or anything real obvious. So that looks pretty good over there. You can take these off and clean them. There's processes for doing that. I do that every few years, but I'm not really worried about it this year. So another thing to just take a look at when you're on this side over here is also this front drive shaft bearing. So right around here you can see where this part sticks out. Inside of there is a bearing that has kind of a flange on the back side of it. And that bearing is prone to getting water in it and the grease kind of degrading and then the bearing failing. You can do a couple different things. You can replace it every few years, or you can take it apart, take the seal off the bearing, clean it out, repack it with grease and put it back in. There's a couple options, but the bearing's not that expensive and pretty easy to change. So that's something just to keep an eye on periodically. So the next thing you want to do is using some of this Yamalube lubricant. This is the suspension grease loaded in your grease gun here. And what I found is I just recently purchased this new tip for my grease gun. This is a lock and lube. I saw them advertised and thought, you know, it probably was a gimmick or something, but after reading some more about it, I thought it looked pretty good and it had a free return policy on Amazon, so I bought one. And the cool thing about it is you push it out like this, slip it onto the Zerk, and then let it back, and it locks onto the Zerk and seals, and it does not leak. I've had great success with it. So that's what I put on here. Loaded this grease gun with that grease, the Yamalube suspension grease, and then we'll take a look at what we're going to do down there. So on these particular phasers, these are the long-tracked Phazer Mountain Lights, so other phasers may be slightly different. You've got a Zerk on this bottom rod in the back, and then a Zerk on this top rod in the back. And then, right here on this rod in the front, you have a Zerk right in the middle where that grease is sticking up. And then right ahead of it, you have another Zerk. Right ahead of it, you have another one. And then down in this hole is another one. And then, let's see if I can get the camera up there. On this rod that crosses in the front is another Zerk right where that grease is kind of sticking down. And I'm not shy about putting grease in these things because you can always wipe it off and it pretty much just cleans off when you ride it on the trail. So I'm really not worried about it. I put this Yamaha grease in there, and the nice thing about it is it's very light. So it seems to have the protection still, but it's very light and doesn't cause the suspension to drag a whole bunch. So I've been real happy with it so far. So once we've got those greased, and if you have any problems the first time you do it, some things could be kind of clogged up, so you might have to take some stuff apart and clean some things out. The other thing you can run into is on some of these, I have one right here on the center one where the Zerk is actually welded into that metal. There's a little hole on the side of it, so I've heard of some guys using JB weld to kind of fill it up. For me, if you put that lock and lube fitting on there, and if you just kind of squeeze the grease gun pretty abruptly, it will actually push most of the grease through and out the ends where it's supposed to be, and leak fairly minimally around the fitting. So it's been fine for me. I haven't really worried about it. So the next thing I like to do is go through each one of these wheels on here, make sure they're free, make sure they don't have too much play in them. They all have a little bit of play just because they're old. It's just a matter of where you want to be happy with replacing them. On these two inner wheels right here, I actually had to replace these bearings last year. These bearings were just totally shot for some reason. I don't know if Yamaha used a different bearing on those inner wheels than the rest of them, but they were just absolutely destroyed. So replaced all four of them, 2 on this machine, 2 on this other machine, but all the rest of these wheels are original. Then the other thing you want to check on is right straight across there where the axle goes in the other side. That is the lower chain case bearing on the right side there. And if you can kind of see over there, make sure it looks okay. That's something that should probably be replaced every few years as well, just to be safe. But you can kind of get an idea how it's at, and doesn't look too awful by looking at it from this back side. On these machines you can see pretty easily. Then you've got your drivers up there, make sure they look all right. Look through the rest of these wheels back here. Kind of hard to get an idea on these upper wheels because there's so much track tension on them. And then on back here to the back ones, kind of same thing. And some of these, you can see some cracks in here. Every single one of my machines has got cracks in these things, and they just keep right on it going. I haven't really bothered with them, but you could replace them. I'm sure they make some kind of aftermarket thing now. And the other thing you want to check while you're down here, make sure you don't have anything broken, obviously. If you've got scratchers, make sure they look all right. Check your high facts down here. Make sure they're not up to where the kind of wear line is there. Everything looks good and uniform. Then depending on how you like to keep your track tension, everybody's different. I think Yamaha says if you pull it down with so many pounds, you should have so much space in here. What I always try to do is kind of have it like that, where you've got just enough gap when it's suspended that the top of this piece is right about the bottom of the high facts, and that's about where I like to keep it there. That's a little looser than what they say, but for riding it pretty easy, it really doesn't ever have a problem. I've never had a problem with it ratcheting, anything like that. So then just kind of spin this whole track mechanism as best you can. Look it over. Kind of hard to do it with one hand here with the camera, but you can spin the whole thing, make sure nothing's squeaking or catching or anything like that. Look the track over for big cracks or anything. This is an older track. It has some cracks in it, but minimal cracks are usually okay. And you can look up into your tunnel and make sure you don't have anything major going on up there, but there's nothing out of the ordinary here that we can see. So now over here to the right side, we're going to check the antifreeze level. You want to replace that antifreeze every couple years. I just put 50-50 antifreeze in it. Just buy the stuff from Walmart or something that's all pre-mixed and just stick it in there. But to change the antifreeze, what you're going to do is pull these two screws out right here, this one and this one. So in taking those two screws off, you can kind of lift this panel up, and as long as you don't have to add any, you can check the coolant level right there. That's the cold level. Mine's actually just a hair above that, right about there. So everything's good in there. And if you do have to add coolant or you need to change the coolant, once you've taken those two screws out, take the headlight cover off. There's another screw right behind there, and that whole panel comes off. Pretty easy. So now what we're going to go ahead and do is we're going to get everything ready to change the oil. So on this particular unit, we have this float plate under here, this blue thing. So we're going to have to take that off. Yours may not have it. It's an aftermarket accessory. You've got a bolt here, one on the other side. Then underneath, you've got 4 bolts, I believe it is, that hold the thing on. One there, one on the other side, and then 2 in the back. Take those off, and then you can get the float plate off. So on this particular float plate, you've got 4 bolts on it, and on the bolts they have these collars. The big collars, the tall collars go in the back, the short collars go in the front. Then you can kind of flip this pan down, and then we'll have to go up on the front and remove it as well. This machine got tipped over last year on its side, dumped some oil, and so there's oil down here that never was cleaned up, but not that big a deal. Just wipe it up, it'll be fine. So now that we've got the float plate removed, that was the screws in each corner. And then in the center here, you've got 2 screws that are Allen screws. And if you didn't have the float plate, you'd have 6 screws that were Allen screws, look just like this one. But since we have the float plate that uses these other holes, we only have the 2 in the center, and then the outer 4 are substituted for the float plate screws. So kind of check on here, make sure there's not any major oil or anything gross. There's going to be probably some dirt and dead bugs and things like that, but that's normal. You don't want to see any antifreeze or things like that. So slide this up out of the way. And then that gives you an opportunity to kind of look at the bottom of the engine. Right here is the oil drain plug. Then over here you can kind of see the other bottom side. You've got some coolant hoses or oil hoses down there, but nothing damaged or bent or anything like that. You can also look up under here in the track area, heat exchanger area. Nothing looks too serious up in there. So everything looks real good underneath there. So we'll go ahead and get our oil drain pan ready to go. We're going to pull that screw out right there, and then we're going to also go over to the tank on the side. I think we'll actually drain the tank first, and then we'll come down under here and drain this. So we're kind of all prepped here. We got our pan ready to go, and we're going to go ahead and start this machine. We'll let it run for about 5 minutes or so just to kind of stir that oil up and warm it up a little bit. Then we'll shut it off and we'll pull the plug. So the plug's back in. Something you can also note here is right inside of here there's also another filter. And Yamaha recommends changing the oil filter itself, which is not that one. There's another one inside. After, I think it was the first so many miles or hours, and then not again until 12,000 miles. I think that's a little bit excessive to go 12,000 miles, so I change it every couple of years, but we just changed it last year, so we're not going to do that. But if you do want to see the video of changing the oil filter, how to get to the oil filter at least, I'll link that in the description. It's the video that's entitled the UP Bushman steering kit. You can just follow that same advice until you get down to where I talk about the filter. And it's a pretty good video for that. So now we're going to go on the other side and pull that other drain plug and get the last little bit of oil out. Alright, so we've got this metric Allen wrench. That's where this metric set comes in handy. I don't think the original kit came with this wrench. But one thing to be aware of is if you've never had this lower plug out of here from the factory, it is extremely tight. The first time I had these out, I actually broke an Allen wrench. Actually broke the ratchet that the Allen wrench was hooked to. The Allen wrench was fine. But once you've had them out, they're not as bad. So we'll go ahead and try to get this out. I'm going to have to set the camera down for that. So I've got it broken loose. Got our drain pan under there. We'll go ahead and pop it out. And there's the last little bit of oil coming out there. So while we're waiting here, there is the oil filter right there. It is possible, people have done it, to fight the oil filter out, but it is very, very difficult. It's almost easier just to buy the UP Bushman steering kit, do that at the same time, just be done with it, and it's a good idea to just check through everything there. Makes it real easy. It can be done. There's also a K&N filter that has a nut on the front of it that you can buy instead of the original that also eases in getting it out. But that's where it is right there above the drain plug, up inside if you can figure a way to get it out. Some people have also reported pulling this panel here and this boot apart and getting it out through there somehow, but again, I've not tried that. Drain plug's back in, and we can go ahead and put the bottom cover on. So we'll go ahead and slide that back on the same way it came off. Remember, it slides back in this channel in the front, and then you have the 6 bolts that hold it on. I'm going to hold off on putting that on for the moment so we can just get on with the video. So right here is what it calls for the oil specification. And down here it notes to use 4-stroke engine oil. It also lubricates the starter clutch in order to prevent clutch slippage. Do not mix any chemical additives in the oil or use oils with higher grade than CD. In addition, do not use oils labeled energy conserving 2 or higher. So you can pick up that oil from Yamaha. That's the correct oil. There's probably something else out there you can use as well, but I'm not sure what the best brand is. Easiest just to pick up the Yamaha and spend the money. You've already spent this kind of money on the sled, you might as well just spend a little bit of money on the oil and make sure you keep it the way they want it. Could be some kind of a scam, you never know that you have to use the Yamaha oil, but just easier to be safe than sorry, but you can always try other stuff at your own risk. So we'll come around this right hand side, pull out this dipstick / sensor, and it kind of catches as it comes out. You want to make sure all the pieces of this are accounted for. It has a tip on the end with some holes in it, and then this case, and then inside of this is actually a little float. I had one of these on a different machine actually fall apart and lose the cap on the tip of this in the oil tank, which was kind of fun to recover out of there. Never could quite figure out what was supposed to be there, and I finally got the schematics and pictures and realized we were missing parts. Went fishing in the oil tank there after taking it all off, and I found the parts, put it all back together. So we'll go ahead and get the oil ready and put it in here. It's somewhere around 2.5 quarts, I believe, without a filter change, but don't quote me on that. You'll just have to go till you find the fill line on here. I usually fill it up to the bottom area, start it, run it for a few minutes, shut it off, let it sit for a second and check the oil again, then add if needed, because it has to pump the oil back up into that chamber below the engine there. Alright, got it all refilled with oil here. Got the cap back on and checked it after running it a little bit. Took just under 2.5 quarts, so everything's looking good. We checked for leaks underneath. So now we're going to go ahead and we're going to go around the other side. Got all the oil cleaned off our hands. And we're going to go ahead and take a look at these 2 drive belts here. So this is the one that's going to go on the sled. It was used last year. It was brand new before that. So we're going to go ahead and put this one on the machine. Everything looks good with it. Then we also have the spare here that you want to check and make sure it's in good shape as well. So putting the belt back on, I always like to put it with the label so you can read it, but it really doesn't matter. On this particular belt, it's not labeled for direction. Go ahead and get it in the primary clutch. Then you're going to want to set the parking brake and work it on to the secondary clutch. So there we go, got the belt on. We'll go ahead and release the parking brake. We'll start the machine up and let the belt get into its normal running position. And then what we're going to do, just for a couple minutes here on this jack stand, or on the lifted up on the ceiling, we're just going to spin the track really slowly, just enough to kind of stir up that chain case oil. So having that running, that gives you a good opportunity to check your brakes, make sure they're working correctly. We already checked the emergency brake. Very lightly check the throttle, make sure it's working correctly. Didn't want to get very fast on that, maybe just 5-10 miles an hour, just enough to kind of stir up that chain case lube. Okay, over here on the right-hand side, see this plug right here in the center? This plug right here. We're going to go ahead and take that out. That is your chain case drain on this particular machine. Make sure we have our drip pan underneath. Kind of a spider web here. You got this little copper washer under here, don't want to drop that. So there it is right there. Let that drain down. And while we're waiting here, this is the dipstick right here for the chain case oil. So we can pull that loose. Got that guy out. So we're going to add, I think it's around 8 ounces of oil into there. And that's the Yamalube chain case oil that you can purchase, is the correct one. There's lots of other options out there. I've heard of a lot of guys using the Polaris version, the Polaris SCL, I think they call it. That's kind of the most affordable one. There's lots of other options out there available though. Alright, so there you have it. We've got it all finished up on the chain case lube change. Last thing we kind of want to look over is this front end. Kind of checking to make sure you don't have any real loose joints or anything like that. You don't have any bushings that are real worn out. Check the toe of your skis as well. You can find that in the manual. And then you just want to go ahead and put all the covers and everything back on. So hopefully everybody enjoyed the video. That's kind of just a once-over basically of the whole process that I go through. You could get a lot more in depth if you wanted to. There's a ton more stuff you could check. But for us, that really works pretty well. And I've also, before winter, you know, we'll still have a chance to look at everything a little bit better once we load everything in the truck and all that. So hope everybody enjoyed the video. Check out the other Phazer videos. There should be a playlist of them. You can click on the whole thing or follow the link in the description as well. So hope everybody enjoyed the video. Remember, you can't finish a project without getting started.